All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining me tonight. Let's just get started. What do people want to talk about today? I've got a mic here, and so for the cameras, if you've got a question, if you've got a thought, a topic that you'd like me to address, let's discuss. I'm just going to take your lead.
Can you talk about the developments that are underway so we know what they are?
Sure. You know, we've got some things related to development. We've got some things in the works. Obviously, we've got some ongoing development projects that are encouraging, and I'm looking forward to seeing how those end up. Notably, the Taylor Tudor project that WXZ is working on, and its attendant phases in the business district revitalization plan that we have. Just for a little bit additional information about that project, sort of the total project, if you haven't already heard, the Taylor Road Synagogue is also going to be a part of that larger vision. It has transferred out of state forfeiture. They're working through various technical aspects of that process to get it into a place where it can be redeveloped. If you remember, and I know you remember, you were on council at the time when that was brought forward. That entire plan was proposed in 2022. And it included the possibility of using the Taylor Road Synagogue not only to create more residential space and redeveloping it that way, but also to use that structure and the property as an extension of community space and performance space that could potentially be a partner to Kane Park. And so that is steadily moving forward. It finally transferred, so that's good news. Beyond that, as I mentioned in the council meeting on Monday, we are working through some negotiations with some home builders as well. And what we're looking at right now, sort of a general broad brush explanation of that process, is when we put out an RFEI, a request for expressions of interest, we got a bunch of responses back. There were a couple responses that we received. One was from an organization called Rebuild Cleveland, with Seth Task is the person that we've been dealing with from Rebuild Cleveland, doing modular home building. They're doing some of that in the city of Cleveland. The cost of completion, the speed of execution for modular build is reduced from your traditional generally. And so that's something that we were interested in pursuing here in Cleveland Heights to try to get a jump start and a kickstart really for the home building that we need to see in the community. The other organization that we are trying to move forward with in the short term is a company called YRM. And the person that we've been dealing with is a man named Ishmael Martin, who, if you take a look at some of our surrounding communities, some of our neighbors, they have been doing some really phenomenal work. The speed of execution on these builds is pretty astonishing, actually. I took a tour of a street in Shaker Heights where they filled in like basically all of the gaps on the street and sort of helped to create a neighborhood there where one had been decimated by demolition. That kind of work in some of our neighborhoods would be really beneficial in completing a block, making it feel more like a neighborhood instead of a block with missing teeth. And I hope that we can move forward on a deal with them because of how well they've done in some of the cities surrounding ours. Those are some of the bigger efforts that we're dealing with right now. There's I hope anyway, some movement over at the Carmelite Monastery as well. I don't want to get too far ahead of the developer on this, so I'm not going to say a lot about that, but I am extremely encouraged by some of the things that I've seen and heard from this developer. The work that they are hoping to do at the Carmelite Monastery site, I think will benefit Cleveland Heights. I think it will be, in a certain respect, a turning point in how we view development, especially residential development in this city. I think that process, if it's successful, will allow us to be less exclusionary in our zoning, in our builds, in our understanding of how neighborhoods are created and how we have historically created neighborhoods, if not with the particular intent to keep people out, with the understanding that some of the designs that we have, the zoning rules that we have for different neighborhoods, absolutely have the impact of keeping people out and making it that much more difficult to create a truly economically integrated community. Now, that's something for, a little bit down the road. I'm optimistic, though. I think that this community, I'm not sure the community's ready for it. We'll see. But I do think that the community needs it. And so I'm interested in that. And of course, Cedar Lee Meadowbrook, the Marquee, you can tell just by looking, they are back up and running with that rebuild, as I knew they would be. As soon as that fire was out, we were talking about demolishing and rebuilding. And so that's moving forward pretty well as well. Do you have any other questions about any other specific developments that you might want to talk about? No? Okay. Anybody else have
Where are the modules? Where is the intent of those coming in?
Oh, like the modular builds for Rebuild Cleveland? So I'm not exactly, I think I know that they have a factory that they've been using. I don't know the specifics right now. Let me write that down.
No, in terms of where they're going to build in Cleveland Heights.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have right now a preliminary list of parcels that we are working with them to sort out. And I don't have that in front of me right now, but I think that's a good question. And when that comes before council, we'll be talking about the specific list of properties that we would be asking council to approve the property purchase.
Is it going to be a cluster, or is it going to be just spotty individual modules throughout the city?
Some of them are more clustered just because we've got multiple vacancies, multiple vacant lots in a particular area or on a particular street.
Okay.
And so grouping those and making sure that we can fill in a block to maximize the impact that the build has on a particular area or a particular neighborhood. Some of them are clustered. Generally, we've got clustered in areas where we've got more needed vacancy fill-in as well. So, but we'll put together a map and make sure that people can see visually exactly where those new houses are expected to be when we propose that to the council.
Got another question, if I can. Sure. Economic integration, as you had mentioned. What exactly does that mean in your eyes? And then the next question would be, is there a city now somewhere in the country that you see as, in your eyes, the vision, the ideal city that we should emulate?
No, I don't think that there is an ideal city that we should emulate. I think that Cleveland Heights has a slightly unique, it's not perfectly unique, but a slightly unique status and condition and context. We are a relatively large city in certain respects. One of the ways that you can tell that is looking at the Ohio Mayors Alliance, which is an organization that is made up of the mayors of the top 30 cities in Ohio by population. Cuyahoga County is peculiar in certain ways. Cleveland has several suburbs that are in the Ohio Mayor's Alliance because of our population size. It is unusual for, at least in Ohio, certainly, it's unusual for the cities of our size, whether you're looking at the other cities that are in the Ohio Mayor's Alliance, looking at a Lima or a Findlay or something like that, where we are so directly connected to the central city. We are not sort of the center of our region here in Cleveland Heights. So a lot of what we contend with, we are dealing with as more of a suburban community than some of our other peer communities in terms of population might be dealing with. And we also have a legacy of historic redlining and in the region, and the attendant effects that are ongoing in terms of housing, valuation and the availability of capital for home improvement or mortgages, those sorts of things. So I don't know that there is a city that we could point to that matches our population, that matches our income levels or poverty levels, that also is so close to a central city that is dealing with the issues and has the opportunities that a Cleveland has. It's very difficult to find that kind of city that we could just emulate. I think that there are certain things about how other cities are doing things that we probably should emulate, and that's an opinion of mine. Not everybody shares my opinion, and so Cleveland Heights is going to have to chart its own path based on what the people of Cleveland Heights want. And we have to get a little granular in order to figure that out, because you can say, yes, I want economic development. And then out of the same mouth, somebody can say, but we shouldn't incentivize any developers. Or, yes, I want additional housing. We need more people in Cleveland Heights. We need to build our population, but I don't want increased density in our zoning. Or, yes, we should build more houses, but definitely not right there. And there's always a not right there. And so what we as a community need to do is figure out exactly who we want to be and what we want to be, and then pursue that. I ran on a particular platform of what I thought development should be in Cleveland Heights. I thought that we should be more proactive. I thought that we should be less burdensome on developers specifically. I didn't think that we should be pushovers, but I thought that we should be more inviting. I thought that we should be more accepting of things, certainly at the outset, as we're trying to rebuild a reputation with the private sector, who we ultimately need to partner with in order to redevelop this city. I think that was in part why I was elected. But that doesn't mean that that's what people actually ended up wanting once we started working on it. And you can tell that by what things move forward and what things don't, and why those things stall. So we'll have to find that out. Cleveland Heights is going to have to figure that out. What do we actually want? Sometimes we figure that out through elections. Sometimes we figure that out through direct action by going to a meeting and saying, hey, council, you've been sitting on this for a little while. How about you pull the trigger? That kind of thing. We don't see a lot of that, but we see some of it. Mostly, though, we see direct resident action when it comes to stopping something from happening. We don't see a lot of resident action when it comes to encouraging things to happen. And I think that's just a natural function of humanity. We're more loss of, averse than we are attracted to get potential gain. It's just a part of the nature of being human. And so long story short, no, I don't have a specific city. I think that cities who are looking at inclusionary zoning, cities that are looking at the economic, the population, the sustainability benefits of increased density, cities that are looking at maximizing on development around multimodal transportation, cities that are reducing the many would say unnecessary barriers to development are going to be the cities that benefit from private sector dollars and redevelopment in those cities. And when you're a legacy suburb like we are, we need all of the advantage we can get. We just have to have the people in place who are willing to make the changes that allow for those things, that allow for, a frontage that's less than 100 feet in a particular district where it makes sense. Our zoning wouldn't even allow many of our houses to be rebuilt if they collapsed right now, because they're in non-conforming lots based on our zoning. People wouldn't be able to rebuild the same exact house that exists in Cleveland Heights right now. That's a problem. We need to fix it. We need to look at those places that are making those changes, because the world's changing. How people are living is changing. We've got old housing here that is not necessarily well suited to modern amenities. And having a refresh, having redevelopment is how a city survives, how it thrives. But we are shrinking in Cleveland Heights, and our population is aging in Cleveland Heights. And I don't know exactly what the remedy is for that, if it needs a remedy. Maybe Cleveland Heights does not need a remedy in that way, and that particular trajectory is fine. I'm not going to, impose my own opinion on everybody in the city, but I think it's something for the city of Cleveland Heights and the people in Cleveland Heights to consider, and look at multiple cities who are doing things where we say we want that. How'd they get it? It's probably not with exclusionary zoning. It's probably not with overburdensome processes for developers to go through in order to actually be able to build on a property. More partnership, less opposition.
Very good catch. Put your hand up. I respect the lady first. Go ahead.
That's okay. I was trying to think of my question.
This is Cleveland Heights. This is not East Cleveland. I have a question for you to answer. What happened to the theater building over there? The theater been vacant, been closed. The whole land's wide. So I'm disgusted about it because we're not getting any more customer people. And the store around there, Marshall stores going out of business within a short time and all that. And there's a lot of vacant stores. Then if you go by the Tommy's restaurant, you see so many vacant windows in there. I mean, people, stores are moving out. I mean, scared me. So I'm putting more money in my house. So I don't want it to be a ghost town or anything like that, though. But you know so much about it, though. How are you going to bring this back into growth? Cleveland Heights, best place to live. That's what I want to see.
Best place to live. That's what I want to see.
Thank you. So I think, first of all, when it comes to the economic development, commercial development in our city, one of the things that I've been trying to do in restructuring how we approach development in the administration is by taking economic development, which was siloed, it was separate, and combining it with planning, with community development, with our code compliance division, with our building and permitting division, so that we can have a lot more coordination, so that the economic development personnel can more easily interface with building and permitting to try to speed through the kind of permits that need to be pulled in order to allow for efficient development, efficient building in Cleveland Heights, efficient renovation of buildings in Cleveland Heights. Bringing building and permitting back in-house and, taking the contract with SafeBuilt and right sizing it, reducing it to only when we need additional help is another way that we can create more of that concierge approach where we are trying to work with business in order to achieve development as opposed to simply almost working against business or certainly not, in coordination with their goals in order to achieve that development. All of that prep work is in the interest of seeing tangible benefit down the road. Historically, our economic development personnel have been tasked with some things that I thought were a little strange. The fact that economic development personnel are working on residential development instead of, or at the very least, conflicting with their duties to work with business owners, small businesses, commercial building owners, to find tenants, to recruit tenants, to market the commercial sites that we have. When you take their focus off of commercial development, of economic development, and put it on residential development, then you're splitting their energy, you're splitting their effort. And I think that economic development over the years has suffered because of that lack of focus. My goal was to refocus economic development on those specific tasks, on working with commercial building owners to help them find ways to update their buildings at lower cost so that they can be more attractive to tenants. Working with tenants or small businesses who maybe need working capital, need help finding working capital in order to make sure that their business can survive, a downturn or survive a startup. Helping home-based businesses graduate if they want to, or if they need to, in order to expand into a commercial storefront in Cleveland Heights in one of our business districts to take over one of those vacancies. Those sorts of things are what economic development personnel are supposed to do. Marketing our commercial sites with partners like the county or Team Neo is another thing that we were working toward as we shift focus of the economic development division to be a more strictly economic development focused division. So that's one of the ways. The other way, we have incentives. We've got a variety of tax incentives, for redevelopment of commercial spaces. We can also help people apply for and receive other incentives, either from the state or from the county, or even, SBA loans, those sorts of incentives and help assistance.
I question you, the theater been making too long.
Now, which theater? Which theater are you talking about?
One on Mayfield, across the high school.
Across from the high school on Mayfield, the theater,
Oh, you're talking about the Cedar Lee Theater?
Don't you know that movie down there?
the movie theater, the movie theater.
No, you said across from the high school. Oh, it's Severance. At Severance?
It's making too long.
They make it too
And
long.
we're not getting, who owns the building here? Pay tax or something, something like that.
Who owns
That's
the
what I'm trying to
building
figure
or
out,
the
though.
taxes?
You know
So-
what I'm talking about?
If you're talking about the movie theater at Severance,
Right.
that movie theater is a part of a larger property that is owned by a company called Namdar. Namdar right now has been working with and is working through an agreement with a master developer called Impact Collective to hopefully redevelop all of Severance over the course of several years. And that movie theater and that particular property will be a part of that redevelopment. as long as they can make sure that deal works. So there is active work happening right now to try to redevelop Severance in a fundamental and comprehensive way that hopefully will create a new town square for us, a new town center for us. It was called Severance Town Center. And we're hoping that this redevelopment will truly make it so. So that's going to be a part of it. That movie theater, when it closed, stopped showing movies, there was another tenant that moved in and was doing events there. Unfortunately, that tenant was not pulling permits for some of the renovations that they did. And one of the results of how they did that work led to, I believe, a carbon monoxide poisoning event. And they were shut down because, it made people sick. And so that had to be shut down for health and safety reasons at that time. I don't know what's happening in that building right now, but the entire Severance parcel within Ring Road, with the exception of the Home Depot parcel, I believe, is a part of this plan to redevelop and revitalize that whole space. So we're working on it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course.
That's my question. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions?
Is the city still pursuing microgridding?
So microgrid, it was primarily a county effort. I believe Mike Foley, who was the first director of sustainability at the county, maybe was moved into working specifically on the microgrid, if I remember correctly. I don't know that Cleveland Heights is going to be one of the first off-takers of a microgrid. I still think it's a good idea for us to be involved in that in some way, because if the county has created this municipal utility, then it's possible that we could be a partner with the county in order to allow for virtual net metering, so that we don't have to have solar or other renewable on site in order to qualify for the net metering work that we would want to be able to do in order to make it more economically feasible for people to tie into local renewable sources. I haven't heard anything from the county that would lead me to believe that Cleveland Heights right now is one of their preferred immediate partners, but I think we're always open to it. I don't know what successes they've had thus far with the microgrid work that they've been doing, any tangible successes. It's possible that a redevelopment at Severance might be a part of that. That was something that we were discussing a couple years ago. And a couple years ago, we were also discussing different ways to redevelop Severance. We were talking with different industrial partners and looking at those uses might have more of an interest in consistent, reliable uptime when it comes to energy production. And that's another thing that a microgrid is really good at, is maintaining uptime. So you reduce outages, especially for those consumers, those businesses that really, really need constant power. But the way that the redevelopment at Severance is going, I'm not sure that it's going to be a great candidate for that kind of specific use of a microgrid. And we don't have a lot of industrial, institutional, commercial use of that type that requires that kind of consistency when it comes to power generation. So I'm not sure that Cleveland Heights is going to be a great candidate for that. I'm happy to be wrong about that, though, because I think that ultimately having these microgrids throughout a region makes a lot more sense, especially when we are experiencing more and more weather fluctuation and higher energy weather events. that are sudden. We're talking about surprise hurricanes in the world now, and we're getting tornadoes in our region when we didn't used to. All of those things have a direct negative impact on our power grid, and having microgrids in our region would probably make a whole hell of a lot of sense. I think that's years down the road, though. I don't see that happening anytime soon. Happy to be wrong about that. And I would be very happy for Cleveland Heights to be an early adopter of that. And I've made that position clear for years, both directly and publicly with the county. Whether or not we're selected as the best candidate for that kind of thing, I couldn't say. Wait, let's get. Oh. Okay, what's a microgrid? Just to explain that. Sure. So a microgrid is something that's set up, basically, it's sort of like a more hyper-local electricity grid, let's say. So it's not the large dispersed grid that we have. It is in addition to that, where you have other sources of electricity generation. Often you can do battery power storage in order to maintain energy generation. You can do diverse sources of energy generation, renewables if you want to attach it to wind, if you want to attach it to solar. You can provide diversity of sources of power generation, and you would be feeding a select group of off-takers. And within that select group of off-takers, what you'd be guaranteeing them is a certain level of uptime and consistency in, their ability to power their factory or whatever it might be that they're powering. And that's the thing that generates interest, because, every hour of a power outage at a factory means that they are not producing the goods that they would then sell in order to generate income for that company. And when you have a microgrid, if the grid goes down and you can maintain power to those power off-takers from that microgrid while the power is out everywhere else, those customers benefit by the increased uptime. You see it a lot with data centers. You see it with factories. You see it with healthcare organizations that may need that kind of consistent uptime as well. Those are the sorts of clients that a microgrid might try to service. Like I said, we don't have a lot of that here, but it could also be just an example project, even for residential. The incentives are different for residential, and it might not be worth it to some of our residents to buy into a microgrid because there might be additional cost in order to receive those additional benefits over and above what you would expect from your generic power company. So that's not something necessarily that I would expect that they would start with at the county, sort of a residential application of these things, because the incentive structure is different for those customers. But a microgrid is basically intended to localize that power distribution and possibly generation, and to increase the consistency of power to the customers that are a part of that microgrid.
Can you talk about development? It seems like we have a lot more units of housing coming online since you took the seat.
Well,
I counted 419 just based on that was back in April. And that was just based on what I could read on the website. So,
well, I know we've started down a path with Nobility Court, with the Marquee Project, with Taylor Tudor, with the continuing attempts to find success in infill home building. I think we're moving in the right direction. We don't make it easy in Cleveland Heights, though. We don't. And I think this is something we've discussed ad nauseum at this point, but it bears repeating every single time we talk about it, because every development, from somebody who just wants to build one house, or even somebody who just wants to renovate a house, every development opportunity is also an opportunity for us to make it more difficult for that person to build. We talked about this last week, whether or not our approval bodies are being too strict and it's having a negative impact on our ability to redevelop this city. If you can't, change the windows on the back of your house, because then they won't match the windows on the front of your house because the approval body just doesn't like it. They don't think it's aesthetically pleasing. It doesn't speak to when the house was built 80 years ago. Well, then you've got a problem, and somebody isn't as likely to want to invest in that property. And when it comes to attracting private development dollars, those development dollars will go where it's easier, where it's more profitable, and often those things are very, very intimately connected. So we have tried to be more aggressive. We've tried to be more proactive when it comes to reaching out to developers and trying to bring them into a conversation. Unfortunately, I don't know that it's cart before the horse exactly, but I'm not sure that the entire city is ready for that proactive approach yet. And so I do have some concern that some of that proactivity, some of that more aggressive development behavior is just bringing developers in to get excited about the potential and then finding themselves in the same drawn out process that we've seen over and over again in Cleveland Heights, where we get to what developers think is the end of a process, where they think there's going to be a purchase agreement that's approved, or some sort of.
You mean like Volpe?
Well, that's an example. That's an example. I know.
But the other thing is that prior to, I'm lost in time, generally, but I think it was prior to COVID. There was this infill plan, and there were two developers that I looked at, and the drawings, and I thought, oh my goodness, no thank you. But then there was one that was modern and modular and Ozan, but that was ruled out because it's too modern, doesn't look like our old houses. But I thought that was really cool, but then it just died. And then just Monday, you talked about somebody who would do rebuild, that would do like 50 infill lots. And then the other thing that comes into the mix of my jumbled mind around infill is that, council has been saying, where's the infill? Where's the infill? What's wrong with you that you can't do infill? That's what we've been saying we want. Well, okay, so now you come with some developer wants to maybe do 50, and I look at them and I go modular. Somebody's going to hate on modular because it's modular. They're going to say, oh, you're going to throw up tacky Ryan homes in Cleveland Heights. We can't have that. We're too snooty for that. But it reminds me of, we have on the one hand nobility court, where we can have nobility court because it doesn't look nice and we could always improve the looks of it, and I guess we did, but it's too many apartment buildings. But also, we don't want Section 8 in our neighborhood. And I want to say, have you checked on the legislation? Because we already did that. You can't discriminate based on source of income. But I just feel like there's a lot people don't understand. And it might be helpful for we the people to get a broader lay of the land of where the guardrails are on this stuff. Because I think that would focus not just council, but people, the NIMBYs, who are going to object to no matter you want to build a doghouse, they're going to have a conniption fit. To say, here's what we've legislated to drive what's possible in the city, and here's why. I mean, I hear these things. One of the things that you said that I thought, this doesn't seem to get said in planning or in the discussion of Nobility Court or Taylor Tudor or Cedar Marquis, is climate change is going to drive people here, and we are going to need places for people to live who maybe live here already, want to stay here, but it's going to be more beneficial to them. Like, I'm a prime example, to sell my house, which is too big for me, and be able to move into something that's more small and affordable. I can't do that right now because the rent's too damn high. And quite frankly, I've been living in a 100-year-old house for 40 years, and I'm really pretty tired of fixing the wooden windows, you know? So, and lead, we're finally addressing lead poisoning and lead abatement, and we're finally addressing climate change and having places, imagining, not today, not do I want to have a brand new house next door to me on that vacant lot today, but how will it benefit me to have a brand new modern house next door to me when people can't live in Florida anymore because it's underwater, right? And they don't have anything to drink besides salt water, and they need to be here.
Well, I
know that's a lot, but I guess what I'm saying is, how do we describe the puzzle pieces so that it gives people an opportunity to understand why we're looking at this, and this? Why is DeVita talking about a tiny home village all through the ARPA discussions? And I'm looking at a map of Cleveland Heights going, where are you going to put that? Where? Not great idea, but what? I mean, I see the vacant lots in the city, but I don't see anything that's ready for what I've read about as a tiny home village. Maybe 2 small or tiny homes, or maybe 3 on a 1 acre parcel. But I mean, all the zoning changes and all the stuff that needs to be done to accommodate that, I feel it just isn't. For us, maybe in planning it is dialed in and focused, but for we the people, I think it would be helpful if we had a clearer picture.
Well, I think I think Drew has a question after you. The phrase that kept coming up in my mind as you were talking about this is, everybody wants to get in shape. Nobody wants to go to the gym. You know, it's not enough to say what you want. You have to understand what it takes to get there in order to determine if it's really what you want. People are that way. Cities are too. Our city has done the equivalent of saying that we want to get in shape and then deciding every single day not to go to the gym. Or maybe, this week we'll go, and then, for a few weeks we won't, that kind of thing. I don't know, and it sort of hasn't been explained to me, that the tiny home village idea may or may not have legs. I don't know. When it comes to what the market will actually bear in terms of somebody wanting to live in a tiny home village in Cleveland Heights, I haven't seen any market research that would indicate one way or another on that. I haven't gotten any information from any developers that have approached Cleveland Heights or made any indication that they would want to produce that kind of home as a result of their market research into the demand for tiny homes. I think having more zoning flexibility for smaller, more efficient homes generally that can allow, or in cluster developments maybe, to help create community among people who are living in that sort of setting. I welcome having that flexibility. I welcome having the ability to focus on allowing smaller, more efficient homes, because we do have a lot of grand, stately 3,000-4,000 square foot homes in the community, and those are a hassle to maintain. Those are can be very difficult and expensive. And some people don't want or cannot manage that much, and having your next door neighbors be even that far away, on your 100-foot wide lot, and it can be more difficult to create the kind of close-knit community. So having a smaller cluster type community somewhere in Cleveland Heights, I think, can be a good idea. I don't know the market on that though. But it starts with being willing to take the risk to allow that kind of thing to be built somewhere in our city. So far, we haven't signaled that we are willing, because it would require some changes. I mentioned development over at the Carmelite Monastery. The way that the way that parcel is zoned right now. So somebody could go over there and maybe build 2 houses. If they demolished the current structures, right now I think zoning would allow them to build 2 houses. Maybe 2 houses are great, and maybe the people around in that neighborhood would welcome having 2 houses built on that property. But building 2 houses there does not move a needle. Building 2 houses there does not help us transition to whatever the next phase of living in a city like ours will need to be. The zoning would have to be changed, or some sort of changes would have to be allowed in order to build something that would be economically feasible on that site, and would also help us to expand our understanding of how we build community. I'm encouraged by the desire to build something phenomenal there, something that I think is really nice, that, an idea that of a build there that's really nice, but the city has to be able to allow it. And that goes back to, what does Cleveland Heights want for itself? Not what do we say we want, because we can say we want to get in shape all we want to, but what are we willing to do to make it happen? And making those changes, allowing for things to be a little bit less strictly controlled by sort of a top-down governmental approach on certain things, and maybe taking it a bit out of the hands of, I guess I can just say, of people who are maybe not quite so predisposed to ongoing evolution in how we live. We haven't struck the progress preservation balance that is beneficial to the community yet, I don't think. Again, just my opinion, but I think that that's inhibiting our ability to achieve the goals that we say we want, which is increased population, increased environmental and economic sustainability, increased economic integration. These are things we say we want. We have to be willing to do the things to get there. And a lot of that comes down to zoning. Ultimately, maybe we'll make the changes. And I hope that that's the case. So far, I haven't seen clear signs that we are easily on that path. I don't even know if I answered your question.
Well, you said Carmelite. Is there a second proposal for Carmelite?
Well,
That we haven't seen yet? Because we saw the first one and we were all like,
we
really have to go to Washington D.C. with this?
we don't have a proposal from the owners. I've seen some things, and I've talked with the owners of that property about some things that they hope to do there, and I'm encouraged by that. But again, I'm not going to try to get ahead of what Dallad wants to do and how they want to roll that out. And not everybody, you know, I can look at something and say, I think that's great. Not everybody is going to feel the same. But, you know, given the area where that parcel is located, given the redevelopment of the site across Lee from you know, and a little catty corner, I guess, the Horseshoe Lake, former Horseshoe Lake, that park development, I think that it does make sense to add more people there and reduce the need for, you know, we can build 200-foot wide lots and somebody can have a really big house there. Well,
If you do,
if-
I'll leave.
how about this? Let's move to Drew and then we'll come back. Okay.
Because many parcels on North Park don't have sidewalks.
I hear you. Well, thank you. And I mean, whether or not I'm involved in more conversation about that, we'll see. I'm sure. All right, Drew.
Yeah, basically this is a complaint. I'll try to be brief, and it really goes to a question of why does the city do such a poor job with communication? You've talked about learned helplessness before. There seems to be also learned indifference. A few times I've had to go to City Hall, ask directions at the information desk. It's usually a police officer sitting back in his chair. Never in my experience has that police officer even leaned forward in his chair. One time he didn't even unlace his fingers. He laid back, he kept his fingers laced, and he addressed me like that. I had to go into the building department. I'm standing at the counter there. The person supposedly helping me was sitting facing sideways from me, never fully faced me, never stood up from her desk, nothing. She sat and faced away from me during the whole interaction. I come here to use the track. I have to check in at the senior center. When I swipe my card, the person at the desk, no eye contact, no greeting, no nothing. This is a problem with the city. Everybody has a complaint about communications. These are all, they all communicate indifference. They all communicate, I don't want to be bothered with you kind of a thing. This is not you, and this is not just Cleveland Heights, but it's, and also, I mean, what you're doing here is, in a sense, saying for 3 years we haven't been communicating very well, you know, and now we're trying kind of last-ditch efforts. To make this into a question, and I apologize about taking so much time, what would you tell the next administration and the next mayor to solve this problem? Because everybody, the one thing they say about City Hall is they are just lousy at communicating. And I'm sorry to give such a negative question. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. I think one of the things that I would advise the next administration to make sure of is that when you put people in place who are expected to assist in the communication efforts, public communication, when you have people in place that are expected to help you do that work, make sure that they're not actively getting in the way of you doing that work, for one. One of the things that I had to learn, and you know, I can admit all too late, is that when somebody is in a position where they are supposed to be pushy in putting the communication from the city in as many people's faces as possible all the time, you can't have somebody in that role who is timid or somebody who is worried about, I don't know, people maybe deliberately taking things out of context, because there's always going to be that. And you need somebody who is going to make salient suggestions and make communications plans and make things happen, even if I don't feel all that up to coming and talking to people today, on a personal level. Get me here anyway. And certainly don't stand in the way. When ideas are brought up that could increase communication, like I've had multiple ideas that I couldn't personally execute, and bringing those ideas to the people who are supposed to help me execute them, and then these things not happening, that's something that the next mayor should be very, very clear about, and understand that when somebody is sort of not activating you in that way, that maybe that's not the person for that position. And you need to be able to make those determinations certainly quicker than I have, in order to get the right person in the role to, push you out there. And the second piece of advice that I would provide to the next administration around communication is, when there are people who start complaining and criticizing about the mayor, always being on the news, talking about things, at the beginning of this term in 2022, I made a concerted effort to push to build relationships that we hadn't had with reporters, to try to get Cleveland Heights a little bit more on the map. The mayor's supposed to be the face of the city, the voice of the city. It's part of the reason why we created the position. And then came the criticism that I'm only there for the photo op. I don't care about the substantive work. I'm not paying attention. It's what they do to politicians. They want you to be more visible, and then when you are, you're criticized for it. Don't let those things derail you, because the constant communication will always bring out people who want you to stop. Don't let them, and it worked on me. I felt criticized. I felt like maybe I was being too, I don't know, I'm not the type of person to self-aggrandize and that kind of thing. I'm uncomfortable doing this. And so it was a concerted effort to do it. And then when the criticism came about the photo op thing, and, I dialed back. Yeah. And that's problematic. Don't let that happen. Focus on maximizing, focus on increasing the number of people that you are actually communicating with. We've been more proactive, trying to get people to sign up for the mailing list, all of this stuff. But it also, takes the person not being influenced by the criticism that may inevitably follow, an actual aggressive or proactive communication strategy. Get people in place that will execute, because writing a plan down in a notebook is not an execution of a communication strategy. You need to actually get the work done. You can talk about the table of contents in your Focus magazine and talk about the articles that you'll write in it, but unless you write the articles, you're not communicating. You're just fantasizing. So make sure you've got people who are on it to execute. And that's tough. Now, when it comes to your experience at City Hall, trying to communicate with people one-on-one and be served by, public servant, by customer service, that kind of thing, that's problematic. And I'm happy that you brought that up. Obviously, different personnel at the city have different levels of capacity when it comes to being friendly, when it comes to being nice, when it comes to having a great bedside manner, customer service focus. That can have really difficult consequences. And I won't pretend like I haven't seen the kinds of differences that you have just discussed myself. I know when I'm sitting at that front desk, I am proactively asking people who are coming in if they need some help finding something. If I'm just in the atrium, I'll walk up to somebody and ask them if they need some help. I've seen other people do that as well. There's one officer, Officer Pitts, who I've seen do that frequently. He's generally a friendly person. Not everybody who fills in for him has that same bedside manner. Maybe some people resent being there, being assigned that duty when Officer Pitts is off. I don't know what everybody's experience is, but I've seen that, and I've seen differences in people's capacity for that. For potential future customer service focus at City Hall or here or anywhere where the city is interacting with people, it might behoove the next administration to bring in a trainer, customer service training. I worked with a gentleman who his name was George Phillips, who actually did that work. This was back at the county. He did consulting. I feel like he did consulting for, it may have been either the Cavs or at that time they were called there was the Cleveland baseball franchise back before they changed their name. And, doing customer service training for their personnel. And that might be something, to standardize, to get people sort of more of the tools, so this is what you do when somebody, comes up to you. This is what you do when somebody has a complaint or they're having a difficult time or they're bringing their upset to you. This is how you deal with that. That might be useful for the next administration to do. I hadn't gotten there yet. But that's another bit of advice, to investigate the possibility of when you have, public facing personnel, that those people could maybe get that kind of training in order to have certain tools that they can then pull out of that toolbox to interact with residents, visitors, contractors, even people from other cities that are there to, come see Rita, those sorts of things, in order to make people's experience of interacting with the government a little bit easier. And I think that goes for some of the people who have the most frequent interaction with our people, our police. And having that kind of customer service training and de-escalate. I know they do de-escalation training. It's not always in evidence because none of us are perfect, but they do that work in order to be able to use those tools, and thinking about it as a customer service endeavor is maybe an additional lens that can help those interactions be more positive and more productive. So that's another piece of advice that I would give, is maybe bringing that kind of training with that kind of a lens.
I need some advice from you. I'm so damn embarrassed now since I did this.
So damn embarrassed.
Cars parking on the grass, blocking the sidewalks and all that. And I see the people who walk the children had to go around, walk in the street, go back on the day, cars speeding up down the street. My wife complained, I'm deaf, I can't hear a damn thing. And my wife complained about the guns going up, bang, 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 bang. Now these people, I said, and look around, I want to know who's doing the shooting. I can't hear. But across the street over there, they have 5 cars, 1 driveway. I mean, 5 cars, 1 driveway.
5 cars or 1 driveway.
Where's the city inspector? I need some advice.
Where's the city
I see
inspector?
so many group homes now, and I see young kids come and go, and other kids come in. It's group home. This is not Cleveland Heights. I mean,
I see.
what is the city going to do? Like the man said, I know that in 1980 when I moved here, they were tough.
Cleveland's tough.
They had rules. Policemen stopped you. I don't
Rude
care.
and the policemen stopped you.
But my problem, I'm going to ask you, I know you're not married, so I need some advice from you. How do I call the police and give them some information where they do their job, taking these cars parked on grass and all that stuff?
Will they do their job getting the cars
What
off?
answer
parking
can I
in the
get
grass?
from you? I mean,
What answer can I get from
I always ask them years, maybe I got makes that music. My wife complain all the time. And they drove up and down the street and all that. I can't walk down the sidewalk. I see people at the sidewalk, but their babies and all that. I have to look around and go out across the street and go back on the sidewalk and all that. Yeah.
People pushing their babies, they have to go around the cars
You
out.
was so
the
bad,
sidewalk.
I would come after you. That's my question. Okay.
All right. The first piece of the answer is that police are expected to come to every call. They're expected to, if they get a report of gunshots, they are expected to, treat that with the appropriate seriousness and try. It can be difficult, can be very difficult, but, it is helpful when people are reporting those types of violent acts. If somebody hears gunshots, they should call and report that. It allows the dispatch and the police to potentially triangulate where, if somebody says, I heard it from the northeast direction, or somebody else says, I heard it, southwest, you can sort of get a better understanding of where these things are happening. And hopefully get ahead of something or begin an investigation. So I would urge people to continue calling. If people are speeding on a street, call and complain about it. We don't know just, psychically that somebody's speeding down a street at any given time. We don't know necessarily that somebody is running a stop sign, unless there is a police officer right there to see it and they choose to enforce in that moment. We just don't know, and it won't be addressed. But having those complaints gives information to the people who actually deploy police. The mayor, the public safety director, is not even legally authorized to deploy police. Mayors don't get to tell the police chief where officers should be patrolling. That is a duty, according to Ohio law, that is the police chief's responsibility. Mayor does not have the authority to make changes to that. And so that's why those complaints need to be sent to police so that they can have an understanding of where in the city these things are happening. And everybody in every corner of the city should be providing the same information so that we have an accurate understanding of the actual behavior that's happening in the city, so that they can make intelligent choices about where patrols are and when during any particular day. That kind of information should be tracked by police so that they can make intelligent choices about how to deploy the personnel. Now, when it comes to other issues like people parking, in a driveway to the point where they are blocking the sidewalk, making it difficult for people to ambulate, to be mobile in their neighborhoods. I don't know that I have an easy answer, because I get the feeling that most of what you are experiencing, most of what people are experiencing, is occurring after business hours. And so we don't even have inspectors who are working at 8 p.m. Giving citations to people who maybe came home after a dinner and parked in a way that makes it difficult for somebody to get down their street. And I know that it's especially difficult for people who can't easily just divert down to the street and back up to the sidewalk, or squeeze between some cars in order to keep walking down a sidewalk that's blocked. And I don't know the solution to that. I mean, I suppose it's possible somebody could start taking pictures of violations and provide those violations so that they can be addressed later, and maybe people will start to get the picture. I don't love the idea of that kind of Big Brother state in a certain respect, sort of that communal surveillance situation, but I think we should probably all get used to it. We've got, I'm certainly getting used to it at this point. We're all surveilled by all of our neighbors all of the time now. So we should just probably get used to it. And if you want to see change in your neighborhood and you need the city government to be more proactive in addressing those concerns, that may be the route that Cleveland Heights needs to go if that's what Cleveland Heights wants. I think a lot of the strictness that Cleveland Heights has experienced when it comes to code compliance has been a double-edged sword. For some people, it has meant that the city stays the way that they want it to be. For other people, it has meant that this city is inaccessible. It has meant that the,
I really like the idea of thinking that should do it. I don't mind doing that. They would say, "Ooh, complain." Wait, first of that now. They must be in my name,
Direct that. Am I to give them
and
their
then they
name?
go drive that. Bang.
Give them their name, they'll drive down the
You
street
filed
and shoot you.
complaint.
It's who filed the complaint. It's a dangerous thing for people to do.
I give the policeman my name, I don't have a problem with that. But when police call these people down and this person tell the policeman who complained.
Please like, tell the people who
I mean-
complained, who complained.
They come after me at night or midnight and see me out there shoot me or something like that. They know,
It's a dangerous thing.
what can I do? What can I do? Huh? Answer my question. Huh? What can I do, huh? Give me a question. You have no answer.
well, I will say for some things, there is
See what I mean?
there is the possibility of anonymous complaint, whether it is reporting something to the police or reporting something to housing code compliance or building and permitting for commercial inspection or something like that. There's always a possibility of providing information anonymously. That can take some work though. And anonymous complaints are given less credence, they can be less reliable. And so the agency that is receiving that complaint, they would need some specific information that can be independently verified. I know that there's always a danger, especially when it comes to reporting criminal activity, violent criminal activity. There is always the danger of some sort of a violent act being perpetrated against somebody reporting it or being a witness. I think more often than not, that isn't the case, but those occasions where it is can be very frightening for a person, and I don't want to discount that. As a community, though, it's still each of our responsibility to, see something and try to do something about it. And sometimes it's not even fear of violent retaliation from somebody. I can tell you myself, I've dealt with some, I would say, social or something retaliation for reporting criminal acts. When I first became a council member, our kid was in the schools. There was this video going around of this young girl getting beaten up by this other kid. They might have been freshmen in high school. It was over by St. Anne's Church. And this little girl is getting punched in the face, if I remember correctly, by this boy. And I saw that and I thought to myself, I can't do nothing about this. I don't know who these kids are, but these are kids in our community. There is, this kid assaulting this other kid, victimizing this other kid. And so I should do something about that. And so I provided that to the police. It was investigated, and the girl's mother was extremely upset with me for reporting it. I don't know who told her that I provided it to the police. Somebody in police let the mother know that it was a council member, and for years, you know, even up to 2021, this was being brought up that this council member had butted his nose into a family issue. You know, from my perspective, I saw somebody who was assaulting another person, and, you know, whether or not that particular person, that little girl or their family wanted this reported to the police, we have a larger responsibility to the community, because that kid who is assaulting that other kid, what's going to happen next week if we don't do something about this? If that kid isn't, you know, provided an opportunity to face justice or something, you know, justice in some form, and the response from the victim's mom to me reporting that crime was extremely negative and public, as social media can get, at the time. And that's the sort of thing that might move somebody to say, okay, fine, if I see your kid getting assaulted again, I won't care. You know, that's not my approach to that. I still think that we should try to do the right thing. I maybe naively think that we should try to even intervene in a civil way and have conversations with our neighbors when, you know, they're doing problematic things. Often, though, I mean, I've found out relatively recently that you try to have a civil conversation with somebody and they don't necessarily respond civilly. And you have to be careful about that too. And maybe our society has just changed too much and we're not going to find our way back. And if that's the case, then we need to adjust to reality. Maybe we can't, you know, walk 2 doors down and have a conversation with somebody who is, you know, parking on the grass and say, hey, you know, I know you guys are probably doing that out of necessity. Maybe I can help you find a different way, because it's, you know, it's in violation of X, and also it's making our neighborhood, you know, look bad. How can we work together? I know that that's a thing that maybe people used to be able to do, but you're right. I don't know that it's something that we can do now because of the response that you might receive from that person. It's a danger. It feels like a more dangerous world in that way. I don't have the answer. We have tried to, you know, create the mechanisms for reporting things to the city a little bit more comprehensive, a little bit easier through the technology that we have. You can always call and make a complaint. The anonymity of that, though, is debatable. I don't know exactly what things are anonymous, truly anonymous, and what things are not. So be careful. You know, try to create the community you want, but
valuable when people drive down the street and say, this is Cleveland Heights, you want to buy a home here. Why can't I buy a house like that with 4 or 5 cars parked on the lot, something like that? I mean, it's not my responsibility, you know, but it's a police department. They have a policy that ticket a house that has only 2 parking.
Ticket a house for 2 parking.
2 years ago, on the corner of Mountain Street and North Appleton Street, I made a report, and this man worked for the city of Cleveland Heights, came to my house, and I parked down the street down the 40. The big truck, 18-wheeler parking there. Had no business parking in front of the house like that.
And no
Driveway.
business parking in front of the house like that.
So he got rid of it and took the truck and moved it someplace else. But now, I don't know if he still works for Cleveland Heights. I can't remember looking for him, though, but he did his job though, but it doesn't make sense to have a truck, have trailer parked in the driveway. This is not Cleveland Heights. I mean, my house value is going to come down instead of going up. So how do we protect that property? I mean, the house inspector is not out on the street. You right there sitting in the office reading, playing media,
The house
watching
inspector's
college
not in the
games
street.
and all that.
He's reading the newspaper in his office. The plain
The
dealer.
value of the house is going to go down. That pump, me and my wife pumped so much money in our house and all that. I've seen things bad. The people who come from poor neighborhoods are doing the same thing in Cleveland Heights, and the house inspector's not doing the job. You're absolutely right that they sitting in the office. I'm not blaming them, but they're young people who moved in, taking over the office, don't have the kind of experience to do their responsibility. They probably don't know what the responsibility is, okay? So I sit in the porch, and I look across the street, the sign says no parking. Now I looked at it, and saying, oh, fade up, you can't see it. And lawnmower come, cut the grass, and blow everything up against the curb. Then when the rain come down real hard and all that, then all blocking up the sewer, then overflow car goes splash out on. I mean, I don't know what to say, no. I told my wife, you put too much money in this house and all that. The other people are not doing the same thing, and there's no complaint, no, but it's all in the hand of God. It's more like East Cleveland. East Cleveland doing the same thing. Not blaming you, but I blame the people who work for the city should be doing their job and work them and not read and play need or worry about or betting on the game and all that. They out and do their job. That's what the politics is about. I mean, I worked for the county for years, 34 years, in the paint shop. They go out and put new signs up. They do everything. And me and my brother deaf, and we had to go over Main Avenue Bridge, and a long time ago, we had no spread. We shoveled and spread it out on the street. We shoveled, spread it out on the street and all
Spread
that.
it back out on the
Things
street.
changed though. I understand that. But
Things change, I understand.
what I'm talking about now today, 2025, boy, I mean, what is the change? And you speaking good, I really want to thank you. You really have it on top of your head. You have everything. You're one of the best speakers I ever met in my life.
One of the best speakers
I
I've ever heard.
I appreciate that. Because my father's a judge. My father's a judge in Cleveland. And I wanted to be a lawyer like him, but I couldn't be because I couldn't hear.
I wanted to be a
Unlike
lawyer.
my year when I was 12 years old. And it just happened because my brother was born deaf. And when I came back from him, when I was in the middle school, in Case Woodland School on Kingston Avenue, East 40th Street.
I was in
I
middle
came
school,
home for lunch, and I came back and collected on the second floor.
came home
And
to
there were
lunch.
45 students that time. Class was real big. I sat in the
Classroom
back.
was real big. I sat in the back.
I looked at the
I'd look.
teacher was writing on the blackboard on the page or something like that. Man, I opened the page, looked at
And I
the
looked at the page.
I looked down. I saw two white legs down there, and I looked up.
Saw two
And
white
she
legs.
said, "Child, did you hear me call you?" I said, "No." What do you think she did? She slapped the hell out of you. It did. I mean, it's not funny. She slapped the hell out of me. At that time, they weren't permitted to do that.
At that
that
time, they
day.
were permitted to slap the hell out of you.
So my mother came, called her out. Then my teacher and my mother had a conversation. And my mother tapped me on the shoulder. She never tapped me on the shoulder. She always called my name. She tapped me on the shoulder. I said, "What, you want to go across the street and take the hearing test?" I said, fine. So I went across the street, took the hearing test. I looked outside, see my brother outside there, oh, everything going up in the hand.
Everyone was
My
like
brother never
signing.
sang to me with his hands. My father was not for a minute. Because they said, this is the hearing world. You learn how to speak, you learn how to read lips. You hear me now? You hear me now? Okay, thank you. So I said, oh. So he gave me $2. I had to go down here and speak center on Euclid Avenue. Learn how to speak.
Learn how to speak.
My father's really tough on me, but my brother, no communication with me because I'm still here.
My brother
So
communication, just
I sat and had a teaspoon. It had to say every ABC word with a name on there.
had to say
When it came to S, I don't want you to make fun of me. You know what that word is? The S word, what is it?
yes, what is it?
What is it, huh?
What is it?
Shit!
Shit.
I couldn't pronounce that word. Everybody was laughing at me. I couldn't pronounce it. I got so embarrassed. And my father said, I couldn't name my $2 with any S name on there because I always say it's shit all the time. You know what I mean? I feel embarrassed though.
I felt embarrassed.
So that's it. And I had to learn sign language.
I had to learn.
I'm hard of hearing. I was safe because my father,
I was saved.
he was a judge. The policeman come to me in the restaurant and said, your father wants you to come home now. I said, 12 o'clock. I had no choice. My father had policemen waiting for him. Even when I was 9 o'clock in the restaurant, the Chinese restaurant, did it. And I see the police come, I said, oh shit, I know my dad sent him. I had to go home and all that. I'm 94 years old now, and I've never been in trouble.
I'm 94 now.
I've never been in trouble. I know how to respect to the policemen. I was taught to call them officers. They would like to hear that, officer.
Officer, they like
I
that.
got away with it. I got away with a lot of things.
I got away
I'm
with
very
it.
thankful. But again, I want to thank you. You really impressed me with all your scholarship and knowing everything about the city and all that.
Your knowledge and knowing everything.
Personally, yes. I'll talk to him personally. Yeah.
Well, I did want to address one of the things that you brought up, though. I can only imagine what the public response would be if I started instructing officers to go enforce against specific people or properties, or telling code compliance housing inspectors, on a repeated basis to go enforce in particular ways. I can imagine that people might express concern about that. So I generally try to stay away from being that granular. But I think that when it comes to making sure that people are out there doing the job, there's always work to be done there. We've gotten complaints from people who are consistently reporting people illegally parking in places overnight. There's one resident in particular who sends a regular email, or at least he has sent a regular email expressing that and saying, I'm reporting that, again, in this location, people are parked overnight. They aren't supposed to be. Whether or not police are capable in any given evening between 3 and 6 a.m. of ticketing cars that are parked illegally overnight in particular locations, or if they are doing something else at that particular time, is not something that I have been quite so strident with police about over the last 3.5 years. my goal has been to try to increase recruitment so that they can be at full staff, so that, you know, the staff that they say they need in order to achieve the goals that we've set through policy. And hopefully they will, you know, continue to make improvements in terms of enforcement in that way by really, you know, having people doing the work that the people are demanding, whether it's being stationed where there are complaints of speeding or running stop signs, or, you know, parking issues where people are obstructing, or if they're parked overnight when they shouldn't be, those sorts of things. You know, hopefully police can manage to do the scheduling and deployment in a way that allows for all of those needs to be met. There's also the possibility, and I brought this up to one of the members of the Transportation and Mobility Committee for Cleveland Heights. It's a resident-led board, that maybe they should look at expanding overnight parking in the city, because we don't allow overnight parking except on certain specific streets. But there are some benefits of allowing for regular, consistent overnight parking, especially if we are attempting to do a naturally occurring traffic calming, because you're less likely to speed down a street where you've got parked cars that you would have to maneuver around. It also allows us to maybe reduce the amount of mandated parking spaces for new housing development if we allow on-street parking, which potentially allows us to reduce the amount of impermeable surfaces that we are producing. I don't know how that discussion has gone, or whether or not they are actually taking that up in any meaningful way, but it was something that I asked them to consider. I asked them to take up in conversation so that they can make a recommendation to City Council about expanded overnight parking, on-street parking. And so hopefully, you know, we can reduce the need for some of those things, like the enforcement actions. If it's not illegal to park on a street, then you don't need a police officer to come give you a ticket. But that's something for the community, really through the council as the legislative body, to decide what streets are and what streets are not useful in that way. But again, you know, I don't deploy the forces, but I do think that it is important for the residents to provide their priorities to the mayor and to the council, so that those priorities can be translated to police or other enforcement, you know, through code compliance, so that we can have a better understanding of what our priorities as a community are. And then we hope that the enforcement follows those priorities.
So I'm thinking about what am I thinking about? There's so many things to talk about, but let me just stay focused on housing. All right, so I've heard you on multiple occasions talk about density and that the housing stock is old. I look in the opposite direction. So to me, the houses are historic, and it's the green space that I appreciate. So when I did my 5-year sabbatical for my first home in Lakewood, what I loved about Cleveland Heights is what Lakewood did not have, because it is dense. I think it was too dense for my taste. So I look at, you know what sells and what's our competitive advantage over other cities. And I mean, on my phone, I must have over 150 historic homes in Cleveland Heights, and I've taken snapshots over the years. It's significant. And when I heard Deanna Bremer Fisher mention, you know, on her platform that we've got more historic districts than any other city in the state of Ohio, it makes me realize what a gift we've got looking at our existing housing stock and being better at it, actually being the best at it, that it becomes a destination location for people to either visit or to purchase, because there's plenty of people that do appreciate that type of historic home. the looks of those homes, the architectural elements of those homes. So, I look at it completely opposite. And those are the values that I would want when I look for the next mayor. I'm looking for somebody that would embrace that. And I guess, what am I missing when I hear density and when I hear about what's the best revenue stream for a city to survive? Is it from the property value increase? Is it from having more people with higher income levels? I mean, what is the sale? What brings in the dollars?
Okay, so you've just asked a multi-layered question. I'm going to try to be as concise as possible. First of all, we are never going to build another 1920s home, right? We're never going to build another. My house was built in, I guess, 1915. We're not building that again. We can't, because it's not 1915, right? My home isn't really historic in that way. We've got some homes that have architectural interest and are historic. They come from a particular time, right? We can decide that that's all we can embrace, right? We can decide that as a community. But we're not going to build another one of those homes right now. So if that's the direction we want to head, then what you will find is a maybe slow, maybe less slow, but pretty much inevitable decline. Because not only will we not be building new 1915, 1920 homes, because we cannot do that, if we refuse to build 2025 homes, 2026 homes, 2030 homes, well, not every single one of those 1920 homes is going to be saved. Ultimately, we may find ourselves in another economic situation where it does not make financial sense to renovate a home for $200,000 when you won't be able to sell it for $200,000 because of the way the market is right now, whatever the right now is. Churn is important. Redevelopment of a city is important because ultimately, the analogy of treading water is really salient in this moment. It's the visual of it makes sense. If you see the shore over there, you can tread water for as long as you can, and you will stay afloat for a period of time. But ultimately, you're going to tire yourself out and you're going to drown. You got to swim there. Maintaining what we have with very little eye toward redeveloping and building new is treading water. Ultimately, yeah, we can try really hard to maintain every historic home we have. All of the homes that have landmark status or something like, we can do our best to maintain them. We can do our best to support the maintenance of those. We can put, buckets of public resources toward maintaining people's homes that are old. We can do that. We can make that choice as a community. But ultimately, over time, it's not a winning battle. Because what it means is that we are pouring resources into this old home, which is important. It's important to preserve those things that have value, that provide value to our community. But you also have to recognize that you can't save every home all the time. So even if we lost one home per year, ultimately it's still a losing battle if we're not building new homes to replace them. We have lost 25% of our population since 1960, since that decade. We're not trending up in population. We're trending down. Our community is shrinking. Our community is aging.
Is Shaker trending up or trending down?
Shaker is actively trying to build new. They are actively trying, aggressively trying to go in a new direction. I've spoken with people in Shaker. One of the conversations that I had with Mayor Weiss, he was talking to me about how what they're trying to do right now is emulate what they saw Cleveland Heights doing before. Supporting business districts, trying to become less of a bedroom community exclusively. The work that they've done at Van Aken, and I'm not just pointing to Van Aken, the Market Hall. I'm talking about across the street. Is it the tower that they've built, and the continuing efforts to rebuild their city. The work that they have done, and I mentioned this earlier with YRM and Ishmael Martin, building new houses. He got those lots for $1 because Shaker Heights' priority is filling in those gaps in a neighborhood, is speed of execution, is getting those houses filled with new homeowners. Their priority isn't, let's make sure that we, maintain the exact character of this neighborhood from 80 years ago. And I know that's not what you're arguing for, but what I'm telling you is that the way that we've been doing business, the barriers that we place in front of developers, we want to maximize on the immediate term profit on a parcel of land as opposed to easing the way for a developer to put a new family on that property. Like, what is our priority? Is it the $20,000 that we might be able to demand for a particular parcel? Or is it, we got a new family in there? Now, the property value question is, I think, a little bit more nuanced than just, we've got these historic homes. Some of them are just old and aren't historic, Others have some architectural interest or something like that, and that's great. We don't need to unnecessarily demolish homes. That's not a sustainable practice either. But we do have a bunch of opportunities for, let's say we've got 4 parcels, and instead of just building 2 parcels, instead of just building 2 homes on these 2 parcels, maybe we build 4 townhomes. We tried that. Multiple occasions we've been trying to do that sort of thing. So when I'm talking about increased density, I'm not talking about putting a high rise next door to your 3-story house. That's not what we're discussing here. What we're discussing is the possibility for neighborhood scale multifamily in a way that is form based, to match a neighborhood to some degree, but might stretch those boundaries of matching to allow for additional population, which means that we've got more people in economies of scale benefiting from the services that we provide and paying into the services that we provide to everyone in the city. If we keep shrinking, a smaller number of people are bearing the burden of providing all of the services to everyone. We've seen it happen in Cuyahoga County and in the region. We've seen it happen in our central city where it's hollowed out. There are less than 400,000 people living in the city of Cleveland right now. It's the same amount of land, right? It doesn't benefit the city of Cleveland to hold on to what we had. It benefits the city of Cleveland to find the next thing that can help grow a population, create vital, neighborhoods where there's activity. Because, a block with 4 houses missing on it isn't a block people want to live on either. And so when we make it more difficult for people to build there, we're creating a less attractive neighborhood for people to join.
And I think we're more in line than different.
I don't think that we need to get rid of our historic homes. Right. And I think that we should continue, as with the work that, at Taylor Tudor, historic renovation is an important goal of ours too.
Right.
But We also should recognize that some people don't want to live in a renovated 100-year-old home. And some people live in a 100-year-old home right now and would much prefer living in some other situation because it's very difficult to maintain it. You know, we talk about aging in place. We talk about this, but we don't necessarily allow for it. Not in the most meaningful ways that we could. And that's the kind of thing that we still need to find a balance for. Nobody's suggesting that we, go up and down Fairmount knocking down homes, right? These grand mansions. But if there is a possibility for re-envisioning how a parcel or two might be built on in order to increase the vitality of a neighborhood, in order to increase the diversity of options throughout our city, instead of creating what we have created historically, which is a stratified, especially economically stratified and segregated in some ways, community, because it is much more expensive to purchase a home on a 100-foot wide lot than it is to purchase a home on a 50-foot lot. And that's reasonable. That makes sense. And so when we mandate that in this area of our city, you can't build less than this square footage of a home. You can't build 2 homes on a 100-foot lot. Even though 2 homes could fit on a 100-foot lot, you cannot do it legally. Now, the reason for that is that people would be upset. There would be people upset that now 2 homes are on that lot when it used to be one really big house. The neighbors might be upset that the character of their neighborhood is changing. I understand and I can empathize with that upset. If the house isn't savable, if it's a vacant lot, I guess we can wait around for somebody to build a replica of what was there, but we're going to be waiting a long time. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about density, but I'm also talking about equity. I'm talking about allowing for people who live here right now, who might want to stay here, who, if we do get an influx of climate refugees, and I'm talking about the ones that, are choosing to move because they have the means to do whatever they want, they can buy up homes here. You got corporations buying up homes here. How are we preparing for people who need to downsize out of that 100-year-old, stately mansion, who can't manage it anymore from a logistical, a functional standpoint? Maybe they're not extremely rich, but they've got this big house and they can't maintain it anymore. Where do they go in Cleveland Heights? Could they stay in their neighborhood and downsize? Not if we don't do something about zoning, because there's nowhere to go. That kind of thing is something that we have to make a calculation about. It's always about progress and preservation. If we just want to get trapped in amber here, that is something that Cleveland Heights can decide to do. I wouldn't want to live in amber.
How about talking about a natatorium?
Natatorium. Okay. Actually, I recently took a look at a legal opinion. I'm going to start here. I received a legal opinion from the law department about the high school pool. And it's probably something that I'm going to waive privilege on at some point and just let people see it, because why not? And it provides an interesting bit of insight into who maintains responsibility for staffing the pool that they are the licensee for when it comes to the Board of Health. And it very clearly outlines what are and what are not the responsibilities of the city when it comes to staffing a pool that is owned by a different political subdivision of the state of Ohio. And it also goes into what the rights and responsibilities of the owner of the pool are under Ohio law. And throughout that conversation that we've had about a pool that exists right now in our community, and who can make it available immediately to whoever in the community wants to swim there, we've also had a conversation about what it would mean if people had access to that pool, what the complaints were about access to that pool in the past, things like hours of operation, dates of operation, when that facility was made available to people. Could it be available in the summer, during summer break? Maybe not. During winter break, maybe not. Those sorts of issues that have cropped up in the past when it came to that handshake agreement that was had, because I don't think that there was ever any actual document that was signed when it came to that. Through that conversation about what was, I think, probably a relatively poor arrangement, we've had a conversation over some years about the possibility of the city deciding to build a natatorium that it would have, ownership of and control of, which would allow the city to have it open, when the community center's open. We've had some discussion and we've had some preliminary plans made about a natatorium that would be built right where the community center is. There is a plot of land right now between the community center and Mayfield Road that looks to be an appropriate site for a natatorium connected to the community center, allowing access from the community center. I think it's a great idea if Cleveland Heights is interested in it. There are some people who don't think we should build a natatorium and have one for a variety of reasons. Some of the reasons that have been expressed to me is that the city shouldn't do it because the school already has a pool and people should just use that. Now, my response to that is not everybody can. For one, not everybody can use the pool in the way that the school and during the times that the school would want them to, early morning, late evening kind of things. At this point, I don't even think the students really have access to the pool at the high school, like over the summer or winter. But, so I don't think that the person who told me that they've got a particular need for swimming that is met by what they imagine their access to that pool would be. But I don't think that that's universal. So I think that it does make more sense for the city to seriously consider building its own so that it can be in control of that, control of the hours, and have more expanded hours and more accessibility to more people more of the time. The other reason why some people don't want us to build a natatorium, that I've heard anyway, is that it is a large expense. And pools are notoriously, money intensive. It's not a money making endeavor. I don't necessarily have a response to that other than the people of Cleveland Heights should probably get to weigh in. The easiest way to do that is to have a process where you show what the plans would be, have an understanding throughout the community and communicate those plans so that people can see what the amenity would be, what it would cost, and put a bond issuance on the ballot and let the people of Cleveland Heights decide whether or not we want to pay for it. Now, it's possible that we could just pay cash. That's a possibility. There are probably other ways to finance it as well that we wouldn't require a vote. But I think that it would be a good idea to have a vote. That way, the people of Cleveland Heights could directly weigh in on whether or not it's something that they want to pay for, an expense that they want to take on. Put a bond on the ballot, for the construction of a natatorium and let the people decide. I think it's a good idea. I think that the people of Cleveland Heights would benefit from it. I think that the kids of Cleveland Heights would have, even more opportunity to do something productive, constructive, fun. Hell, maybe the kids could just go for free. And yeah, you're a Cleveland Heights kid, you can use the pool. Maybe, again, that would be a decision for, like the council would weigh in on cost structure because that's part of their responsibility. But that's something that could have benefit for generations. And the city wouldn't be subject to some other body determining when and how, a facility is made available. So I think that it's a good idea. I think that, the conversation that we've had about it recently, like this year, trying to bring back the concept with an eye toward putting it before the people for conversation. It's in the same conversation as the rebuild of Cumberland. The problem is that there are people who dominate that conversation. And this is not to take away from anybody's right to be heard, to be passionate, because it's important. The people who are using the pool have an important voice that we all need to hear about their experience of the pool, because we don't want to take something away unnecessarily. We want to take those needs into consideration too. But that ongoing conversation should also include people who don't use the pool, who might. And I think a natatorium and the conversation around a natatorium and what Cumberland allows for is a conversation that we can have simultaneously. Because if we did have a natatorium, for instance, and that provided an opportunity for a lap swimmer to have different options for their lap swimming. If it's raining, maybe they go to the indoor pool. If it's not, maybe they go to Cumberland. Does that allow for more flexibility in what Cumberland offers? Can we reduce, lap lanes at Cumberland because we've got additional lap lanes at a natatorium? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not advocating for a particular number of lap lanes. I hope that nobody misinterprets this. But it's a well, yeah, they know. But it's a conversation that we can have as a community. And then in all likelihood, we'll make a decision as a community that doesn't make everybody perfectly happy. Because that's how community works and how compromise works. So, I guess anybody can make a public records request. I've got somewhere pages of potential plans for a natatorium that we discussed, I think as recently or back in April, I think is when these particular plans are from. I haven't really had an opportunity that made any kind of sense to start putting those out there, but I think that we should. I think that we should start the conversation now. I'd have to find them and just release them. But and just so everybody knows, these are preliminary plans. These are not a decision. These are a discussion.
With Cuyahoga Falls, their natatorium, and I noticed that SUMA was that a joint venture? Did they just get like licensing rights to the natatorium? Do you know how that sort of relationship is? I mean, it seems like with us being so close to the clinic and UH, that would be a great model to look at.
Well, actually, that is something that I have had a little bit of discussion about. It wasn't with the clinic, it was with Metro, talking about physical therapy and the use of, a natatorium to provide those kinds of services and services for people who, need more exercise, but need it in that low impact way, and working with health. So we have had a little bit of that conversation, but we haven't gone in depth on that yet. I think it's a great idea. I think it's something to pursue. I think that it makes complete sense, especially since we have, like you said, the clinic right down the street, UH. We've got Metro here in our city as well. So it makes sense to have that kind of functionality here. If we were to build an natatorium and work with them in order to possibly defray costs, if that's a possibility. I've visited the Cuyahoga Falls natatorium. I have, and you know, it's connected. They've got their workout area, and you go through, and it's a really nice facility. I think that Cleveland Heights could take some lessons from that facility and use them here. It's just a question of whether or not Cleveland Heights residents are interested in footing the bill, making it happen. And whether or not it's a priority for people is also a conversation about whether or not people feel that it would benefit them. Because if you don't feel welcome, or if you don't feel invited, or you don't feel like a natatorium would be a place for you, it can be difficult maybe for that person to be convinced to support it. But if we can show how, no, you too, you can come swim here. If you don't know how to swim, well, we can provide that service too. We've got multiple organizations that we've worked with to help people learn to swim, even in advanced age. And so that kind of thing is a part of the sell, you know, for this kind of facility, is making sure that people know that they can be included as well. A lot of different types of people go to Cumberland, and that's lovely. A lot of people don't, for a variety of reasons. And it would be the same with the natatorium. We would have to work to bring people into that community and make them feel like they're a part of it so that they can support it and receive the benefit from it. But I think that's a really great idea. If we do move down that road toward building a natatorium, partnering with a healthcare organization, if they're willing to do so, and having those services located at the facility, I think would be remarkable. And we have had a little bit of that conversation, but we haven't gone in depth. All right, I don't know what time it is, but I don't want to. 8:20. All right, I think we've done it. I think we've achieved this. If there are any last questions, one last question. Let's get him on the mic though, just so.
Council is the legislative branch. How come they do not legislate?
Okay. I don't know if you want to repeat that for the people at home, or.
Council is the legislative branch. Why is it that they do not legislate?
Okay, so I think that the history of Cleveland Heights and its government, we've been a bit path dependent. Old habits are hard to break. You know, there isn't as much of a local model for some of these things. There is always, and this isn't specific to Cleveland Heights, it's not specific to a local council, like a city council or a town council or village council or something like that. But there is a disconnect between politics and policy. People who are very adept at politics aren't necessarily adept at policy. We don't necessarily expect all of our electeds to have a great deal of experience there or facility with some of these things. So that's part of it. With a local council, a part-time local council, you expect to see less of that experience. You expect to see less of that ability than you would, say, for a congressperson or even a full-time municipal legislator in a larger city. So there's that. I think, you know, in the history of Cleveland Heights, you know, governed by a city manager, although ostensibly the legislative body was the governing body. Often the city council, even being the policy, you know, making body and the legislative and budgetary authority, the city manager was given respect by the council to bring things to the council for council's review and approval or rejection. And I think in part, maybe the supervisory relationship made council feel more comfortable with the dynamic that allowed the city manager to lead that direction a little bit more in a functional way, in an operational way. The change that we've experienced in our form of government has led to a naturally occurring oppositional relationship. And I think we all knew that this would be created, that there would be some friction between the legislative and the executive branches. We expected it. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's certainly not a bug. It's a feature in a certain respect. It can be warped. It can be, it can lead to some perverse actions. But we do expect a little bit of friction there. Hopefully it's friction that's positive and productive. I don't know that we've seen positive, productive friction throughout this transitional period at all times. Sometimes yes, often no. But when it comes to the activity of legislating, I think that we've seen a lot of distraction. And I think that that is maybe the interplay between policy and politics, where not everybody believes that good policy is good politics. And so, some of the things that we've discussed before, whether it is being more aggressive in figuring out where our zoning is falling down on the job and inhibiting our actual redevelopment and allowing us to thrive as a community as opposed to shrink as a community, or those issues of enforcement, the type of enforcement that we're talking about. We can provide a violation to somebody, but if it's more profitable for them to ignore us for a while, then maybe they will. So maybe those penalties need to be changed, or those sorts of things. Some legislation that Melody Hart proposed a while back about changing our enforcement structure from criminal to a blend of criminal and civil, depending on the context, would have provided additional tools. That's a legislative act. It's a relatively large policy change that the council probably should be spearheading, especially if they've got concerns about an outsized influence on policymaking by the executive. I've talked about various things that I've suggested that council consider taking up, like the vacant storefront fees, and even now the vape shop legislation that might limit those things, or dollar store limitations, those sorts of things that can have a demonstrable impact on community. I don't know. I think, any council, the mayor, any future, elected will show what their priorities are by what they're working on, by what they accomplished, by what they've achieved. We can all look at the legislation that's passed. We can all look at the topics of the meetings that have been had, and get an understanding of what the priority is for any given iteration of council. I don't want to speak for them. I can have my own opinion based on my observations. Everybody else can take a look at what they've done in order to, generate their own opinion about what their priorities have been. But when it comes to legislating, isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do if you are going it alone, which I've had to do on occasion when I was, a council member, and even now as mayor, I've written legislation myself and introduced it before the council. Some of that legislation has been ignored. Others have been taken up and moved forward in some form. but it can be difficult for council members who are not necessarily adept at writing legislation to produce it. And so I don't want to, disparage anybody. If you don't have that experience, you don't have that experience. It might not come naturally. It might not come easily. There are ways around that, especially if you are talking to community members who are making their priorities known. For instance, when community members came to me when I was a council member and wanted to talk about immigration enforcement, civil immigration enforcement in the city of Cleveland Heights and what our role should be as a municipal government, I didn't know anything about civil immigration enforcement. Not really. It wasn't a part of my direct experience. And so I couldn't have possibly in that moment just sat down when somebody brought that idea to me and just written some legislation. What I had to do was rely on resources. So I relied on the people who brought it to me for insight into what they wanted. And then I started taking a look at what other jurisdictions are doing, commentary on that, other interest groups, and ultimately I relied on ACLU in particular and their Freedom Cities initiative to draft some legislation that, in my view, could restrict appropriately our involvement in civil immigration enforcement while also following federal law and not violating federal law, but not being an unnecessary participant in what our community's values tell us is a destructive way to interact with your residents or your visitors. I didn't have to go it alone. And one thing that I have suggested to residents who have come to me asking for advice about how to work with council to achieve a particular legislative goal, I say, make it easy on them. Try to make it as easy as possible on them. This is what ALEC does. ALEC will write the legislation for the legislator, right? You just plug and play. It's a copy-paste job. Do that for us here in Cleveland Heights. If you have a legislative idea, a priority that you and a group of your, community members are getting behind and want to support, make it as easy as possible for these local municipal legislators to take your idea and understand it as legislation. Get a template. Talk to other communities, other community groups that have done similar things, and try to adapt it as much as you can to our context. Take a look at where it might go in the code and make it easy for council members to introduce it with some modification if necessary. Because that'll shorten the time frame and it'll also make the hill a little bit less steep. Because if the hill's too steep, they're not going to try. It's not going to feel worth it. It's not going to feel like it. But the other piece, and this is an important piece, is that sometimes we get in our own way. I've said this about development. Sometimes there is a benefit that people who have achieved power in status quo want to maintain. They want to maintain the benefit of the system that they have been successful in. So making easy changes can be scary. Making change easier can be scary for people. You see it around the debate, and I'm not just talking about in Cleveland Heights, the debate about ranked choice voting. If somebody is elected in a system that is not ranked choice voting, they might be a little concerned about switching to ranked choice voting because they can't necessarily predict what their success rate might be in that new system. That's scary. And the people who get to make the decision, or at least have a huge hand in the decision, are the people who are successful in the current system, right? It's the same with wards. Right now, council operates in what they call a plurality at large election. You'll experience it in November. 4 seats up, however many people are running, and the top 4 vote getters are going to get those 4 seats. If there were 20 people running, the top 4 vote getters get those seats. All of those vote getters might get a very small number of votes, but they would get those seats. That's not necessarily the best way. Maybe that's a value judgment and it's subjective, but when it comes to the real will of the people and trying to find what that is, shrinking it through maybe a ward system or through numbered seats so that you're running on your record, you're not in a melee, as they call it, or a jungle election. Those sorts of changes might lead to legislators who have more of a legislative plan, a legislative platform, legislative goals that they can express to the voting public. And it can be judged against other legislative candidates and their, expected legislation that they want to produce and policy changes that they think are important. Most of the time, though, politicians, and, like I said, there's a disconnect between politics and policy. Most of the time, politicians deal in platitudes and, at the end of the day, they're in the seat, their platitudes won, and they are not necessarily held to any particular policy goal that they have expressed because they just want better housing. Who doesn't want better housing? They want economic development. That'll be a bullet point on somebody's literature. I want economic development. I want safe streets. Okay. How? That's where the legislation comes in. But the people who are in the seats got there through what we have now. And that can make it difficult, even if they're not consciously feeling the difficulty of doing something different. And so sometimes they place barriers in the way for doing something different. We see right now, there are good reasons, and then there are maybe negative impacts to the system that our current council has in place right now for even introducing legislation. There's some inconsistency in how it's actually practiced, but ostensibly, if I remember correctly, and I'm not keeping, close track of how they're doing this, but what I understand about their process for introducing legislation is that legislation must be discussed in committee first, and then there has to be some indication that enough council members are okay with the idea before any council member will be allowed to maybe ask the law department for help drafting something, or maybe even if they don't need that, introducing something doesn't get introduced until it already seems like you have enough council members interested in the concept to even bring it forward. There are potential benefits for that, and I imagine that anybody defending that system would say, we don't want to waste the law department's time. They're already stretched, sometimes artificially, but they're already stretched. We don't want to waste time on an idea that can't succeed. If it doesn't look like this is ever going to get support enough to be passed, why are we wasting our time talking about it? Why are we wasting our time with a piece of legislation? I get that. It's the efficiency argument. And that's not to be discarded out of hand. It's just, that's a consideration. I think what it also accomplishes, though, is that you make it extremely difficult for an unpopular idea to be made concrete enough to convince people that it's a popular idea. Because it is very easy to dispose of and discard an idea that isn't officially before you as a body. When it's introduced, though, the idea is that council hears it, they give it first reading, it's on an agenda for the world to see, and then it is referred to a committee for substantive discussion, for potential recommendation for amendment, and then recommendation to the full body for passage or rejection. That's the normal course of council's business. That's the expected process. The process that they've created, these, I think they're ad hoc rules. I don't think that they're actually written down anywhere, but they've sort of agreed that, the concept has to be brought up, and I guess a majority of council has to seem interested in it before it can move to a step of being officially introduced. If I'm incorrect about the specifics of that, if there's some nuance there, I invite council members, as I'm sure they will, to express a clarification. Well, and there is some inconsistency there. Some things you see don't have to go through that process. They just get introduced, sometimes past that night, who knows. But, well, I can't.
But yeah, well,
I don't know.
I've seen it in action, and it was scary to me when it was planning and development, which has had none of their agendas dealing with actual planning and development deals, right? Since this new council was seated and the new rules were put in place where you got to have like a buddy, right, who wants it. And it went to planning, and it was National Church Residences at Lancashire. The city is going to sell some parking, some of the municipal parking.
We hope to.
And Mr. Kuda referred it to Planning and Development Committee, which, as far as I could tell, had never taken up a deal issue. And the meeting was convened in the morning, and I was watching the live stream, and Ms. Russell said, well, now we have this thing on Lancashire staff was there to answer questions. No questions were asked of staff. They stood by the wall ready to answer questions. And Mr. Cobb said, I don't think this is a good idea. And Ms. Russell said, I go with you on that. And that was the end of it. So 71 potential $500 to $700 per month, utilities included, apartments on Lancashire for seniors over 55 was just dismissed because Mr. Cobb didn't feel like it. And you know what? I was really angry about that. And I wrote to Zanft and I said, what the actual, did that just really happen? And he wrote back and said, we were surprised too. That whole project could have simply evaporated in that moment had it not been pulled back by, I don't know who said what, but it later came. And so to me, when I watched that process, I thought, well, we need to rework this process because that's one person swaying another person, and that's 2 votes, and it only takes 2 votes to sink something in a 3-person committee.
Yes. Yeah. So again, I think some of the rules that we make are appropriately the brakes on the car. This is not, this is government. We don't want it to be Facebook, move fast and break things. At the same time, we don't want it to be all brakes. We don't want everything to be stop. We need some go. And I think appropriate guardrails for introducing legislation. I can admit some, I don't know if fault is exactly responsibility for some of the strangeness. When I joined council in 2015, I had professionally been writing legislation, and I expected to be an active legislator when there was something important for me to pursue. I was by no means some prolific legislator. I didn't, draft a piece of legislation for every council meeting or anything like that. But to that point, council members generally did not draft legislation, did not introduce legislation. Ultimately, what happened is that the city manager put legislation before the council, and because the council members were the only people legally authorized to introduce legislation, a council member's name was just slapped on the legislation perfunctorily, basically. And generally, it was the name of the council member who had been selected to chair the committee that had responsibility for that particular topic area. Whether or not that committee actually ever met, which they generally did not, because everything was discussed in committee of the whole. I started to write some legislation. There were a few pieces that I started writing. I think the council president at the time felt the need to ask whether or not that was allowed. It was at the time. And I started trying to hold committee meetings to discuss topics, and I would hold them in council chambers because that's where the actual camera equipment was, and I wanted people to be able to see the discussion. Things have changed since then. So committee meetings in the executive conference room, there are cameras in there now. And that's a good thing. That's a positive development. But I mean, I do have some concerns about the roadblocks that are in place specifically for minority voices on a council moving forward. If you can't introduce something that might not immediately be popular, how does any change ever happen? If you can't put something before the body and try to convince them that it's a good idea, even if they're unfamiliar, even if they are skittish or timid about change, actually putting something before them is the only way really to allow for a debate about change. I don't think the.
Is this it? Okay. I just want to make a quick notation, and then I have a brief question. The quick notation is that it looks to me like with this election, chances are that we will have switched from a diverse council to a majority white council. That's just a notation I was thinking of in terms of depending on who gets on. But my question is a brief one. You have little less than 5 months left in office. Give me the 3 things on your agenda you want to get done before getting out of office.
All right. Well, I appreciate your generosity in terms of how much time I have left in office. I think what I'd really like to do is see if we can get some more development started, like really, really moving and sort of concrete purchase agreements or incentive agreements so that we can get some things moving. I'd like to do a little more toward refocusing the different divisions in our planning, neighborhoods, and development department to make sure that economic development is working on economic development and the community development has more responsibility for residential development, and that all of the divisions are working more hand in hand to facilitate development and preservation in our city in a meaningful way. I would like to move forward on some of the recommendations that I've been working on from the Racial Justice Task Force, most notably that Community Police Review Commission, to make sure that our community's values are reflected in our policy direction in a way that can't just be ignored or attacked. I mean, I guess it could be, but it might be a little harder. And so that's another piece. And then really importantly, the 2026 budget and that process and the transition to the next mayor are extremely important priorities. I think stability in that handoff will set a precedent. making sure that as we develop a 2026 budget, the mayor-elect, when they are elected, is brought into the process to provide some input and potentially make some changes to that budget process before it's enacted, hopefully by the end of the year. In order to get them up and running most effectively, the transition piece of it, ensuring that they come in and can work with me to put out job postings before they're sworn in so that they have some runway to find the best qualified candidates for positions that they want to fill. If they've got a different setup for what the mayor's office should look like, having the ability to put out those postings, even potentially create new job descriptions, so that they can get a running start in January, and not be at a disadvantage when they first start. Taking them and introducing them in a substantive way to the functions, challenges, opportunities, plans for certain things, so that they can get up and running. Those are really important priorities of mine if I'm continuing through the end of the year. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'll maybe see you on the next one.